Good morning. My name is Kevin Gunn, and I served for a number of years as deacon at All Saints Parish in Highland Park. Our Archdeacon, Laura Siriani, has asked that we give a little Deacon 101 talk whenever we deacons are asked to preach, especially in parishes that don't currently have deacons serving. So here goes. Deacons are one of the four orders into which the Episcopal Church divides all humanity: lay people, deacons, priests, and bishops. Deacons are charged to bring the church to the world and to interpret to the church the needs, concerns, and hopes of the world, with a special emphasis on service to the poor, the weak, the sick, and the lonely. And as Father John reminded me several weeks ago, to carry out other duties assigned to you from time to time, which accounts for a lot of the work I've actually done as a deacon. I personally have only served in a parish, but deacons do hospital chaplaincy, prison work, serve in diocesan and other nonprofit institutions, and all sorts of other jobs as well. I was salaried, paid by All Saints. More often, however, deacons are not paid. And although I served in a parish with parish clergy and staff, all deacons, myself included, report to the bishop over there in Echo Park. In addition to preaching, deacons have specific defined roles in the liturgy: reading the gospel, bidding the confession, setting the table for communion, and dismissing the congregation into the world at the end of the service, at the end of Mass, as a symbol of our cross-boundary position with one foot in the world and one foot in church. I did a lot of my work with the homeless in Highland Park. In fact, All Saints converted our sanctuary into a homeless shelter during the winter rainy seasons. There had been about 50 people sleeping in the sanctuary pews just a few hours before I was ordained in the same sanctuary. So that's my sort of 30,000-foot view of deacons and the diaconate. I would be delighted to answer any questions you might have about deacons or about becoming a deacon, because we can't have too many deacons. So feel free to hit me up. I was also delighted and honored when Mother Kate asked if I could preach at this glorious parish of St. James in the City with its glorious air conditioning during this heat wave. And I was really excited when I looked at today's scripture readings. If there's one book in the Bible that I would consider especially deacony, it would be the letter of James. And we're lucky that we get parts of the letter over the next few weeks. Today's reading from James actually contains the punchline of the whole letter of James. Here it is. So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. That could be the deacon's creed. I had the opportunity a couple weeks ago to join with Margaret Ecker's spectacular group of volunteers in the Thursday Cook Fest, in which we prepared the hot dishes for Friday and Saturday's soup kitchen. I basically chopped onions for 2 hours. But the care and love I witnessed in the act of preparing good, nutritious food from scratch, from fresh ingredients, was nothing short of inspirational. The attention given to the food preparation showed the absolute respect for the dignity of our Friday and Saturday guests. James would be impressed. What happens here is the exact opposite of what James is warning us about today. No distinctions are made among guests or between those served and those serving. On the contrary, Margaret and her group, and by extension this parish, honors the poor. In James' words, they are really fulfilling the royal law according to the scripture. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And as much as I love James, I'm really anxious to move on to today's gospel reading from the second half of chapter 7 of Mark, because there's a lot to talk about. If I had to give this particular section a title, I would call it A Tale of Two Healings. The second of the two healings gives us everything anybody would want in a healing. Jesus, on his way to Galilee from Tyre, is introduced to a deaf man with a speech impediment. Jesus takes him off in private, puts his fingers in the man's ears, spat, and touched his tongue. Kind of gross. We even get a direct quote from Jesus in Aramaic, the language Jesus actually spoke, rather than in the Koine Greek in which the gospel is written. We are there in an almost cinematic moment when the man's tongue is released and he begins to talk plainly. In this healing, Jesus is the fulfillment of what Isaiah predicted: the ears of the deaf unstopped and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. It's a miraculous healing entirely by the book and firmly within Jewish tradition. By contrast, Jesus pretty much phones in the first healing, if phones had been around then. So let's back up to last week. In the first half of Mark chapter 7, we saw Jesus on the banks of the Sea of Galilee scolding a group of scribes and Pharisees who'd come down from Jerusalem to spar with him about his and his disciples' table manners. Jesus criticizes them for letting human customs and traditions get in the way of serving God. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition, he says. Today, we see that Jesus leaves for a brief getaway in the region of Tyre. Now, this seems pretty characteristic of Jesus, a big public event followed by an attempt to get away somewhere by himself. I looked it up, and Tyre is about 35 miles away from Gennesaret, where the confrontation with the Pharisees and scribes took place. So about a 12 or 13-hour walk. The thing about Tyre and its region is it's not in Israel. Today, Tyre is in Lebanon, and even in Jesus' time, it was a foreign place. It was a simpler, more tribal time then. Jews, like Jesus, divided the whole population of the world into two groups: Jews and everybody else, whom Jesus called Gentiles. So Jesus, in taking his break, crosses the border into Gentile land. Jesus is now the foreigner, the stranger in the strange land. What a difference 35 miles makes. And no sooner does he check into his first century Airbnb in Tyre for a quiet weekend alone when a strange woman, a Syrophoenician, finds him, bows down at his feet, and begs him to heal her sick daughter. Begs him. And what does Jesus, who a couple days earlier was calling the leaders of his faith to account for letting human customs and traditions get in the way of doing God's will, say to this woman? Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Ladies and gentlemen, meet snarky Jesus. And the woman, who shall remain nameless for 2,000 years, responds brilliantly. Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And Jesus replies, for saying that you may go, your daughter is cured. Unlike the second healing, we never meet the patient, and the happy result takes place offstage. Was Jesus having a bad day? Snarky Jesus turns up from time to time in the Gospels. Remember, he isn't very respectful to his own mother at that wedding in Cana. Normally, if we weren't having a baptism today, at the end of this sermon, we would all stand and recite the words of the Nicene Creed. And we state in that creed that Jesus is 100% God and 100% human. Now, this is not a misunderstanding of how percentages work, but the expression of a holy mystery. In this story, are we getting a brief glimpse of the human being Jesus? I don't know, but thank God, in the end, the mercy of Jesus triumphs over his initial judgment. But the woman, even though she's a Syrophoenician, a Gentile, not a child of Israel, behaves completely in the Jewish tradition of arguing with God. My favorite example is Abraham arguing with God over the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember, don't destroy the town if there are 50 righteous, 40 righteous, etc. Abraham successfully bargains God down to 10, and of course there aren't even 10 righteous people in town, so God does what God intended to do in the first place. But I think this woman is more in the tradition of Jacob, Abraham's grandson, who physically wrestles with a man or an angel or God. Story's kind of mushy. At the end of the wrestling match, Jacob says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And that blessing took the form of Jacob being given a new name, Israel, which is interpreted in this context to mean the one who strives with God, or the one who struggles with God, or the one who argues with God. And indeed, that name becomes the whole name of the whole tribe Jesus belonged to, and the Syrophoenician woman decidedly did not. Though the woman did not get a new name, she doesn't even have an old name, so what do you expect? She did get the blessing she sought, the healing of her daughter. When the woman responded to Jesus, I think Jesus heard her argument, but I think he also heard Jacob's words, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Are we supposed to look at this story as a cautionary tale? Like, try not to get caught up in the way the world works and misdoing the will of God, but if you do fall short, don't beat yourself up. Remember that it even happened to Jesus for a brief moment. Comforting in the moment, maybe, but I think there is better news for us. I think this brief story from the second half of the 7th chapter of the Gospel of Mark is absolutely revolutionary. God's healing power is available even outside the boundaries of Israel. A Syrophoenician, a Gentile, a woman, a little girl, total outsiders by any definition of the day, are direct recipients of the healing power of Jesus. The boundaries and distinctions make no difference at all. They are created by humans and are irrelevant to God. We Christians take Jesus as our model and guide for how to live in the world. I'd also like to take the Syrophoenician woman as a guide. Her faith and her trust in Jesus, whom she had never met but only heard of, kind of like us, her not letting go until she receives the cure she seeks, those are behaviors I seek to emulate. Her argument that even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs is persuasive not only to Jesus, but to us as well. The love, the healing power, all the unearned blessings from God that we call grace are available to everyone. So let's not let go until we receive the blessing. For us, the crumbs are more than enough.